Hello, welcome to first lecture for AP Euro. We're going to go over the context for the course. We're going to look at the late Middle Ages from approximately the year 1300 CE to the first half of the 1400s. We're going to talk about just some of the context for the AP European History course. Let's look and see what that means, though. So if we look here, if you've ever seen a Star Wars film, a lot of them have a text scroll at the beginning of the film that kind of explain what happened before the movie, what started, what events occurred, who maybe some of the main characters are, just some background information that the viewer should know going into a Star Wars movie. In AP history classes, that is very important. Your essays will involve you to bring up context at least once, sometimes twice. And just kind of knowing how historical events are kind of connected to each other and how things can be related or causal when talking about different events is super important. So setting the stage, connecting the dots, and bringing things together is a big part of history. So this content in this lecture today isn't necessarily going to be the most important information in the history of modern Europe, but it is the context. It does set the stage for a lot of more important things, at least in the regard for the AP European History course. Let's kind of go through some of those things. So here's a map of Europe at the time of the late Middle Ages. We see tons of just different little colored areas. Each area more or less represents a separate kingdom or empire. There's smaller ones that aren't even on this map. So it's important to note that, around the year 1500, which, this map could show that, we do see about 1500 different arguably countries or kingdoms in Europe. This shows that we just have tons of different areas, tons of rulers, tons of powerful nobles that can kind of control things. Some of these areas were just like as big as a courtyard. You're not going to see them on this map, but just know that that is the case. We are seeing, just tons of division, tons of different kingdoms, and we really aren't going to see a unified Europe for centuries. And we're going to kind of work our way there in this course, but we are not quite there yet. All right, so what are some events that are happening in the late Middle Ages that kind of create a context for this course? A few things in this slide. We have the Great Famine and climate change. So we see a Great Famine happen from arguably the 12 to 1300s, arguably from the time from the 1300s onward into the 1650s and later. We're not going to see a lot of stability. In Europe, we're going to see tons of violence, disease, death, warfare throughout the next 300 or so years. It's a pretty chaotic time. Things do start to get better after 1650, more or less, and we'll talk about that later on in the course. But starting from this time period, we're just going to see more or less consistent death and destruction and disease throughout Europe. We are going to see this event called the Great Famine occur. That happens kind of tied to this other event called the Little Ice Age, which kind of goes on and off, which messes with crop yields, which messes with people's livelihoods. People are more or less, 95% of Europe at this point, subsistence farmers or peasants, and they grow what they can to survive. Anything extra they sell if they can, but oftentimes in times of famine and climate change, they're not going to be able to do that. So they're going to not eat enough, get sicker because they're not eating enough food, and die. We do see this continue from the 1300s on. It doesn't get as bad in certain parts. We can see death attributed to things like the plague, around the mid 1300s. But yeah, it is a big problem in this time period. So who's blamed for this? We see Jewish people blamed for this, unfortunately. We see a practice that is continued before this period occur called the mostly involved the persecution of Jewish people. That practice of targeting, persecuting Jewish people is going to be a trend in this class, unfortunately, and it's called the pogrom. You can see it typed at the bottom there. The pogrom, again, is an organized, sometimes with government support or at least government or local authorities kind of turning their turning away from it and turning a blind eye towards these events of people, Christian people, going out looking for Jewish people and attacking them, taking their property, in many cases killing them too. So this is going to be a trend, again, we're going to see throughout this course, unfortunately, and we see it in this period as well. All right, so we see the Great Famine caused tons of chaos, changing climate caused some chaos. Nothing quite comes close to the Black Death or the bubonic plague or the Great Plague, often called many of those or names similar to that. We see this hit Europe in the middle of the 14th century, so in the 1300s. We see just massive death and destruction. Within Europe, we see somewhere between a quarter and half of the population affected and ultimately killed by the bubonic plague. Urban areas, of course, cities were hit much harder than rural areas. And you can kind of see on the map provided kind of just the path of the disease. We see the disease kind of come from the east, pass through trade routes, hit trading centers, hit cities first, and then kind of get everywhere else where you have large urban centers, we see that those places hit the most. Just tons of death, tons of destruction, and we start to see this fascination with death really kind of grow in Europe. After the Great Famine, we see this continuing fascination with death with the plague. People began to realize that, something different was happening, that a lot more people than normal were dying. Of course, disease had hit Europe prior to the bubonic plague, but this was different because it was just hitting so many people. It was hitting doctors, or, what you could consider doctors in this period, because we really don't have modern medicine yet. It was hitting them. It was hitting priests. It was hitting nobles. It was hitting the common folk. It was hitting city members. It was hitting rural peasants. Anyone who lived in Europe at this time could have been a victim to this plague. So we see this kind of art tradition kind of develop called the Danse Macabre or Danse Macabre that really highlighted this idea that, at any moment, any time, we could see people become victims to the plague and die. You see this in churches. You see this, honestly, mostly in churches. You could see this kind of anywhere, someone could you could potentially see it like in castles and places like that. But you see these a lot in churches, and you can see a Danse Macabre kind of illustrated at the bottom where you see priests, a king, a noblewoman, a clergy member, and then just some peasants dancing with skeletons, or more or less dancing with death. Because again, at the end of the day, everyone's going to die. Some people are going to die quicker than others, and we're going to see death kind of rear its ugly head more so than you would like. People didn't really know how to deal with death and deal with this disease. Again, there's no modern medicine. We're not going to see modern medicine and the idea that germs exist for centuries. So towns took drastic measures. The city of Milan, for example, closed off its walls, which was actually relatively effective. As we know, social distancing can prevent the spread of disease. So Milan kind of did an early version of that. We see the religious zealots, the flagellants, come around and whip themselves because they believed that this disease was a consequence from God, that people were being too sinful, too prideful, and thus God was sending this disease to get his wrath, to punish the people of Europe for being too sinful, too prideful, etc. You see people in towns do other remedies, such as shooting cannons to cleanse the air, to wipe out the bad miasma that that these townspeople believed had infected these villages and these town centers. So yeah, there's just widespread chaos for decades. The plague doesn't go away until the late 1700s, early 1800s. You see outbreaks of it continue. It's still around today, by the way. It's just, we have modern medicine, we have germ theory, so we realize ways to prevent such horrible diseases, and they usually work pretty well. We see some people, again, blamed for the spreading of the disease. Again, Jewish people were targeted, pogroms occurred, We see again, people not knowing what to do. So again, a way to kind of maybe deal with the disease and prevent the spread of disease people believed was killing and massacring Jewish people. You can see here in this etching, this illustration from the 1500s, we see a doctor surrounded by ill people, all kind of huddled together, kind of infecting each other, with the doctor kind of investigating urine to see if, you know, the color was off and if that was related to it. We also see here on the left, again, another illustration of the Danse Macabre. Again, death was the great equalizer in this time period, and whether you're a lowly peasant or a high noble, you could be a victim to death. All right, next big contextual piece of history from this period is the 100 Years' War. This was a war fought for a little bit over 100 years between England and France. At the beginning of the war, we see England with a foothold in France, and then continue to kind of expand throughout the war, taking land from the French kingdom, from the French monarch. The tide turns, however, once we see the France make some victories against the English, kind of fight back and take some land back. So by 1453, we kind of see France more or less in control of most of its modern day borders, with the English kind of just resigned to just a few pieces of land in continental Europe. Why did this happen? A couple reasons. Most importantly, you could argue, is Joan of Arc, a French peasant girl who says she has visions from God telling her to lead France to victory. And she is successful. We know that she did fight in battles, that she was victorious on the French side, and her involvement in the conflict really did start to help the French recover in the battle in the last 20-30 years of the war. However, unfortunately, she is captured by the English. They know the power that she has over the French and that how inspirational she was, so she is executed for heresy or for, you know, having visions, things like that. Unfortunately, that was very common for women at the time. If you're a woman and you speak to God or speak to angels, you're considered a witch many times. Witchcraft is widely believed at this point in time, as we'll talk about in this course. So she is executed. The French don't really do anything to help her either. The French king, Charles VII, just kind of lets things go. What are some notable things about this conflict other than Joan of Arc? We see gunpowder and artillery used, which kind of start to turn the tide of warfare to a more modern type of warfare rather than medieval warfare. We also see peasants used as foot soldiers. That's kind of a new development, and arguably helps bring about keyword slowly, helps bring about the end of feudalism over time. Pull peasants off the field. Don't just rely on knights and other, warriors like that, but pull peasants off the field, give them some money, and have them fight for you. And it was used on both sides. Again, the French win, defeat the English, push them out of continental Europe, and the borders more or less stay the same until today. Not entirely, but relatively similar to what we see in Europe today. Social unrest. To go along with the 100 Years' War, there's, in the plague and famines, there's just tons of social unrest in European history, and late medieval European history, I should say. Again, we have the feudal system in place that puts peasants at the bottom, with lords right above them, knights kind of in the middle between peasants and lords, the clergy probably above lords, and then king at the very top, with the Pope being above the king. So there's a hierarchy, a social caste system in play in Europe. Depending on the area, depending on the time period, you're going to see some of those things fluctuate, but you're going to have lords always above peasants. You're going to have the clergy usually at the top of the caste system. And that more or less remains in place until arguably the French Revolution, when it decisively starts to go away with the revolution, then Napoleon's actions in Europe. But looking at the social unrest of this period, we're going to see some peasants and some people in cities try their best to get rid of it. We're going to see unrest in towns and cities. Peasants are going to have sometimes a renewed interest in trying to better their circumstances, especially when the plague wipes out tons of workers. Peasants can demand higher pay. They can demand higher fees for their work. Same is true for people living in cities that survived the plague, at least. and they're gonna do what they can, and that was more successful. Any uprising we see in this period that was violent usually was not successful. People are gonna, fight back against the corrupt and villainous knights that often get portrayed in movies and TV shows as being honorable and, noble, chivalrous people. Knights in the real medieval Europe were awful. They would get bored and they would go to neighboring villages and towns and rape and kill and steal. Very, very common for knights to just kind of do that all the time. We do see some of these revolts originally successful. The Jacquerie, for example, in France saw some initial successes when peasants began to follow a mythical laborer named the Jacquerie. However, over time, we're going to see that none of these pan out. There was an English peasant revolt in this time period in which peasants, again, had initial successes in their revolt, overthrew some manors. The king at the time, Richard II, invites the rebels to his castle for a parley to discuss terms and hopefully come to an agreement with the peasants. The peasants go there. As soon as the peasant leadership gets there, they're all captured and the leaders are executed, ending the rebellion. We're going to see this kind of happen again and again. Just poor peasants, trying to just better their circumstances, get used and abused by the system, betrayed, and then, the leaders of these uprisings are going to be killed. Social and urban changes that don't involve violence. We're going to see the acceptance of prostitution in many European cities and towns. It's still mostly illegal, but we are going to see some acceptance on the borders and the edges of towns, or at least it's going to be overlooked. Rome, for example, this inspires some early Reformation critics and early Catholic Church critics. We see Rome full of prostitution and sin and gambling and alcohol abuse. This is relatively common in many parts of Europe, even if it wasn't, the most popular city at the time, Rome. We're going to see homosexuality, a sin and an illegal act, but it's mostly going to be hard to enforce. Same thing with rape and sexual assault. It is a crime, but it's going to be hard to enforce, hard to target. In this time period, we're going to see women, viewed mostly as second-class citizens, if not worse. And this is going to be a continuing theme, unfortunately, for the next several centuries. This idea of women's role in society, what place should women have in society, should women have rights, is going to be a constant theme in this course. And there's a French term for it called the querelle des femmes. And I'll spell that for you here. Querelle des femmes. It's going to be a consistent theme in this course. And again, it's the translation of it is the women quarrel or the women debate. Again, what role should women have? Again, we're not going to see any major changes until the 1800s at the earliest. Here in this time period, again, women are not believed when they are assaulted. They are told to be at home to take care of the kids. Rich, noble women will have slightly better rights, but again, they are going to be, again, viewed as second-class citizens for the most part. Women monarchs, such as Isabella of Spain, Queen Elizabeth I, are, going to have power because they're monarchs, but again, they are still going to be viewed through a male lens. Elizabeth I, for example, in one of her most famous speeches, describes a yearning that she has to be viewed as a man, a strong, powerful man, and not viewed as a weak and feeble woman, which is, again, the common belief at the time. In the cities, we see, in cities and towns, we see the most important social institution throughout all of Europe, but especially in rural towns and cities, is the church, the Catholic Church. They control everything. They control your week. They control the money you have in your pocket. They collect tithes from you, 10% of your earnings. They control your destiny. After when you die, your hands, your mortal afterlife is in the hands of the Catholic Church. People tried to do their best to go to heaven because the Europe at this time was awful. It was a backwater. Disease, death, destruction were rampant. You'd be lucky if you lived to 40. So Europeans believed, they lived this horrible, awful life for hopefully a promising afterlife in heaven. If you wanted to go to a good place in the world at this time to see some amazing sights, to learn some things, and experience more interesting, diverse cultures, you'd go to the Ottoman Empire, especially after 1453. You would go to China, to Ming China, to see a vibrant, populous empire full with trade, commerce, business, and wide-ranging society and culture. Europe, again, was a backwater for the most part. Rome was big and nice. Paris and London are mostly pretty small backwaters at this point that are more or less plague infested as well. Not to mention Rome is also plague infested.